Welcome to another session. Today I'm going to speak about a theme which I've used the title "A Woman and Her Youth Are Soon Parted," and that comes from the famous words or phrase from the books of antiquities, which talks about a fool and his wealth are soon parted. The idea being that if you're not really aware of the value of what you have, there is a probability that you will lose it. And I am going to connect that to what we talked about in the prior session, which had to do with the importance of being indifferent towards sex and towards women from a male perspective. Now let me start by perhaps making a statement that will connect both what I get to talk about today and what we spoke about in the last two sessions. And that is, as a man, you have to understand, especially as a young man, you have to understand the reality of the following. That as women get older, they have less of what a man wants, which usually is beauty and youth. But from a male perspective, we want more, or rather we have more of what they want as we get older, which is resources. So what you find from a male perspective is you're playing a very different game. The set of indicators used to judge your value as a man is very different to a woman's. In a number of the prior sessions that I have done, I talk about 3 or 4 different important concepts from the female perspective: your sexual marketplace value, your reproductive fertility value, your non-sexual marketplace value, and finally your economic intrinsic value. Women are judged based on their looks primarily, which has to do with your sexual marketplace value. For men who want to have children, the second criteria we use is your reproductive fertility value, and that has to do with the quality and the quantity of eggs you have, which plays very closely to your age. Your non-sexual marketplace value is something that men care about once they've gone beyond 35. Well, in my opinion, anyway, and that has to do with your attitude, your mannerisms, whether you're feminine, whether you're traditional, and then finally your economic intrinsic value, which has to do with your ability to earn, your human capital, which most men care very little about. From a female perspective, as a woman ages, as she gets older, just by biology and nature, they have less of what a man wants, which is beauty, youth, and sex. But as a man gets older, we come into our prime, we come into our place. Our ability to create wealth increases, and therefore we are found to be more desirable the older we are than we are when we are younger. Now, what that simply means is, from a male perspective, time is your ally. And that's simply why I said in the prior sessions that you shouldn't think about getting married until age 35. Between age 18 and age 35, those are the prime years for you to sow the seeds of your human capital, which you would convert at some point to financial capital and financial wealth. And once you get to 35, assuming you stay focused from 18, at 35 you should have enough resources, you should have enough skills and experience to be able to command a reasonable level of income. You should be in a position whereby you have developed a set of skill sets that makes you valuable in the marketplace, and the skill set perhaps has been so perfected to the point where people are willing to compensate you disproportionately for that gift or skill set you have. So time is your ally as a man, and that simply means be patient. The eagerness that most young men have to settle down, to start a family, to be considered in the eyes of family, society, to be doing well, which usually comes with the tag of a family. That pressure is quite high, but it is in your best interest to delay such decisions, at least until age 35. You've heard me say before, you should not get married before 35. You should not consider marriage before 35. You should not be in a mono relationship before 35. You should not be living with a woman before age 35. And all of that is simply a process of saying, I'd like you to practice the art of selective procrastination. You will certainly get a lot of heat, comments from people you love and people who love you. And some of them will wonder why and what is wrong with you. But recognize that today the life expectancy for the average man in the modern West is about 80 years, between 80 and 82 years. If you go back to the 1940s and pre the 1940s, the life expectancy was about 45 years. Certainly it did improve post the Second World War. But from the 16th and the 17th and the 18th and the 19th century, all the way up to the 20th century, the life expectancy for both men and women was roughly about 40 plus years. The average age at which a man and a woman got married was roughly 25 years. And that meant that you had 15 years to be married to one person. Now that wasn't a long time. Today, the life expectancy is 80 to 82 years for men. For women, it's somewhere approaching 85 years. And that simply means that there is no rush, especially from a man's perspective, for you to get married. Now, in today's session, I'd like to do something which is to expand on the reasons why it is to your advantage to stay single, stay unmarried, stay focused on your goals, your dreams, your ambitions, your wealth, and be indifferent towards sex, and be indifferent towards women, be indifferent towards relationships. Most importantly, be almost emotionally unavailable. I'm not saying you shouldn't be kind. I'm not suggesting you shouldn't be courteous. I'm not suggesting you shouldn't be loving. I'm simply saying you should not be available for relationships, because relationships can sabotage your dream. Something interesting happens if you've ever been on in a game where you're playing a game against someone who is probably more powerful than you are. And the game perhaps is one whereby the idea is to get the person to the ground. What you tend to find is if you're the smaller person, it's much harder. You expend so much energy, but you make very little progress in getting the person to the ground. For those who practice some form of martial arts, they understand what I am trying to say. It's much easier for the bigger person to get the smaller person to the ground. If we bring back the male-female dynamics and relationships together, what you find is there's a concept called the balance of power. At the younger age, in my opinion, between age 18 up to about 30, certainly between 18 and 28, 10 good or 11 good years, the power belongs to the woman. Now let me use myself as a good example. when I was 18, when I was 19, when I was 20, when I was 21, there were women who I found very, very attracted. I was very attracted to, and I found very attractive. These women who were, say, 9s and 10s in beauty certainly were appealing to men from my age group, 18, all the way up to 35 and 40 and 50. And that meant that they had more options. They had more to choose from. At 18, I had potential, but let's be very frank. Every day we see potential wasted. So potential means nothing today, because every day people waste their potential. You go to the cemeteries, you see people buried in cemeteries, and in those cemeteries are dreams, ideas, and aspirations and inventions that were never fulfilled, things that never saw the light of day, simply because the potentiality that was in that person was never materialized, it was never realized. It went to the grave with the person. The dream was buried with the person. So at 18, I may have had potential, but that potential had not been qualified, and therefore I did not deserve the woman at 18. And let's be very frank, and perhaps in many ways, I wish women understood this balance of power concept a little bit more. The younger you are, the more you have the power. You have more of what men want. And how you use that power you have determines your success from a relational perspective with men. And now I am speaking from a female perspective. But the younger a man is, the less he has to trade. And you've heard me say that it's all about trading. A relationship is about what you bring to the table. A woman who is, say, 20 and who is an 8, a 9, or a 10 in beauty has a very high sexual marketplace value. A man who is 18, equally good looking, he may have looks, but guess what? Looks don't pay the bills. Looks don't actually pay for groceries. The mortgage payment has to be made every day. So finances makes a huge difference, which is why a man's economic intrinsic value is the most important thing. And therefore, a woman who is 20, 21, 22, 23 has enough leverage. In order for her to trade equally, she has to find a man who is, say, 32, 33, 34, 35 or above, who has enough wealth. So it's a fair exchange. Anything beyond that is unfair from the perspective of the man should have resources, the woman should have beauty. That's a fair exchange. And I found when I was quite young, the women I found attractive certainly were found attractive by other men, but I had nothing to offer. So most of the time it was all about game. It was all about using words. Most of the people I knew, some of them sabotaged in pursuit of sex or in pursuit of the female validation, female affirmation. They sacrificed much of their potential simply because they made mistakes, because they were not being guided. What I'm hoping you get from this is not to say that you have no value as a man the younger you are. What you have is potential. That potential has to be put through the fire, which is partly why I said between 18 and 35, 18 years. That 18-year period is simply when we put you through the fire. Assuming you go to college and you finish from college at, who knows, say, 22, 18 to 22 for college, and you start to work. You give yourself 10 good years, or rather, you give yourself not 10 years, enough time. In this case, let's say you're trying to achieve some level of mastery. You need 10,000 hours. Give or take, that takes 5 years. If for whatever reason you travel around the world, you do things, you play, you like to have your fun, we allow a margin of safety of 20%. And we say an extra year just for fooling around. That's 6 years. 6 years, if you add 6 to 22, that takes you into 28. So roughly about age 28, you're starting to come into your own self as who you are in terms of competence. Give or take another 2 years, you get into 30. My recommendation is usually from 30, you're starting to walk into the early stages of manhood, because now you have a skill, a talent, an ability that you've harnessed and that people recognize, and you can trade in exchange for wealth. But more importantly, you've had enough time to go through your maturity phase, because men generally, we mature very, very slowly. But let's go back to my story. At 22, a woman has more. She has youth, she has beauty. Therefore, her sexual marketplace value is very high. Her reproductive fertility value is also very high. Therefore, she has something to bring to the table as part of the negotiation. A boy who is 22 has just graduated from college, and I remember in my experience dating someone who was great, had sisters, had brothers who were more accomplished because the age difference was quite steep, and they were very successful, doing very well, very, very well in their respective professions. And here I was, this young boy with just potential. And here I was trying to lay claim to their sister, and I had nothing to show for it. Not even my father's wealth, because there wasn't any wealth available to bring to the table. And that meant all I could do was make promises. And this is where, men, we make mistakes. You should refrain from making promises you do not understand. And you should refrain from making promises you cannot keep. Now, in some of the sessions I will do later on, I'm going to talk about the importance of being very honest with women, irrespective of where you are in the age demographics. The importance of honesty, the importance of telling it as it is. Now, most people might listen to what I say and say, I don't like what he says. But the one thing you will not say is that I'm never subtle about my thoughts. I say what I think, and I put it out there, and I leave it there. It's important to be very honest. But anyway, coming back to my story, here I am using promises to secure the beauty, youth of a woman. That meant that the balance of power, it was an imbalance. She had all the power. And what tends to happen is when you date women in the same age group as yourself, plus or minus a year or two, they know that they have the power because you have nothing. You bring nothing to the table other than potential. And that simply means that, and this is an observation I've made about people I knew who got married relatively young, who got married to the woman who gave them the opportunity. Although sometimes that woman was not necessarily deserving of the man, irrespective of his lack of resources or wealth. But my observation, and this connects to the conversation from the prior section, which has to do with sex. If you are not established as a man, in this case you're below 30, you haven't achieved anything, you become a slave in many ways in the relationship in relation to asking for your needs to be met. You become someone who has to beg for sex. Now, I've seen this amongst people who have been married 5, 6, 7, 8 years, 9, 10 years. And in almost all of the instances, they got married to the woman when she was at the peak of her beauty and her youth. And at the time, the man had nothing. So the balance of power was on the woman's side. In many cases, it was almost as though they would go through weeks of laboring just to have sex, begging, pleading, cajoling, doing everything possible for sex. In this case, usually in a relationship, the woman has the monopoly on sex, especially if you're married, because you've made a vow not to look elsewhere. And I've always found it to be slightly wrong, perhaps a session I should do separately, as to how one person can intentionally refuse to meet another person's need purely from the selfish position of playing the power game, playing the control game. And so in many ways, my recommendation for you to be indifferent towards sex and to delay marriage, delay relationships, and to stay focused on your dreams is because time becomes your ally and time becomes your friend. In many ways, you practice delayed gratification. You simply say, well, I'm just going to wait. Now, that does not mean that you do not satisfy your sexual urges or your needs in between. I'm simply saying, void yourself of all emotions when you're casually dating. Have as many booty calls as you want, but stay focused on your dream. You should be married to your vision, your dream. Now, this simply means that as you get older, your skill set starts to grow, your human capital starts to build, and there is a shift in the balance of power, such that the woman who is 25, when she gets to 27, her youth, her beauty starts to wane. Now, this is not something to be criticized. That is just nature. We as men, our youth and our beauty starts to wane. So this is an equal opportunity arrangement, but there is a slight difference. And the difference is this: men are judged based on their resources or any derivative of that: power, money, fame, influence, resources. Women are judged based on their beauty. So as a woman gets older, she has less of what a man wants. And as a man gets older, he has more of what women want. And this simply means at 35, should you listen to my advice, you have the human capital, you have the wealth, you have a career, but most importantly, you have the ability to then provide the necessary foundation, which is necessary to support a family, to support a woman. And therefore, the balance of power shifts to a point where there is almost, I wouldn't use the word equality, but a woman who is 27 still has some of her beauty, some of her youth. Her reproductive fertility value is still high. But if she's dating a man who's 35, he's come into his manhood, maturity, wealth, and therefore he has something to bring to the table. So there is mutual respect. And I know there will be exceptions to this. My experience and my observation, more so my observation than experience, has been when I've looked at people I know who got married too young or who went into committed relationships too young, the balance of power stays with the woman and seldom shifts back to the man. Because most of the men are frozen in the past, in that state when they got married or when the relationship began. Whereas the men who I know who have delayed commitment, getting married, starting a family, moving in with a woman until 35 or above, or sometimes until 32 and above. There's an aura of respect that they bring to the relationship, an attitude they bring to the relationship, because their sense of identity is not linked to the woman and is not linked to sex. Their sense of self-esteem, their self-worth, their self-concept is linked to their purpose, their goals, their career, their profession, their wealth, their manhood. And therefore, when they come into the relationship, they don't play games. Now, I'll use myself as an example. I'll go back to when I was probably 18, 19. It was just a nightmare. You had to beg for everything. Everything was almost like you were being teased. You were given just so little, just a little bit, just to shut me up. And guess what? At that age, all I had was potential. And as soon as I turned 19, going to 20, it dawned on me that it was more important to focus on my future, my potential, and to ignore everything to do with pursuing women. And what that meant was, as soon as I made that decision and I left that one relationship, I never went back to being a serf, begging for affection, begging for sex, or begging for intimacy, or begging, pleading, because I had developed a concept of who I could be. I came up with a set of ground rules about being emotionally unavailable, about staying focused and remaining driven, focusing on my grind, only allocating about 5% of my time to the pursuit of women, to relationships. And that simply meant, in my dealings with women, I made it very clear on the first date, I'm not looking for a relationship. I have no intentions of being in a relationship until 35. I have no intention of actually moving in with you, or you moving in with me until I'm ready to get married. I have no intentions of actually having kids before marriage. And I am emotionally unavailable. But if you want to have a good time, great, we can do that. But I am not looking for an exclusive relationship, because I have too many things going on. I'm too busy. And it would be unfair for me to make promises I cannot keep. Now, that kept me in good stead, because it allowed me to develop a concept of who I was, independent of the other party. And genuinely, I would say, have there been trade-offs? Absolutely. But when I look at the net benefit, I come to the conclusion that if the life expectancy, and this is the average life expectancy, and certainly I don't know if the life expectancy applies to me, but if the life expectancy is 82, between 80 and 82 for men, there is absolutely no rush today to get married before 35 for a man. Absolutely no rush. You get married at 35, you live with the same person for 50 years, you're exclusively connected to that person for 50 years. If you've had no experience, if you haven't sown your wild oats, if you haven't actually been around and done things and traveled and seen people and tried things and failed and tried and failed, you risk, and this is an important statement I would make, you risk, or rather you increase the likelihood of going through a midlife crisis at some point in your life. And I have observed this amongst men, and in almost every scenario, the men in question, they started too early. They placed the relationship before their potential and before their purpose. They put forward the concept of a family first. They sacrificed who they could be. When the kids came and the kids grew, at 40, 47, 48, the midlife crisis came. For the pure reason being, when the kids left home, there was nothing left in those men, because everything had been built around the family, and the kids. So the point I'm making from today's session is simply to say, the concept of a woman's value is no different from a fool who has wealth, who, because of a lack of wisdom and lack of understanding, is parted from their wealth because of poor decisions. Similarly, men and their success, men and their wealth are easily parted for making the wrong choices too early. Let me bring today's session to a close, and I'll close by saying a few things which has to do with the concept that I don't know if you've ever played a game or watched a movie where you can actually increase the speed or you can decrease the speed. If you can, and this is a difficult request to make, slow down the speed of your life, especially between 18 and 35. Just put it down to 0.5 speed rather than 1, and that would enable you to take stock of the decisions you're making. Effectively, it's no different from actually watching a train wreck in slow motion. If you've ever been in an accident, it happens so fast. But if you have the opportunity to observe the sets or all the sets of decisions that are being made, the environment, the circumstances, there's a probability that you might make a different decision just before the bang. And in the same way, if you can slow down the speed of your life between 18 and 35 and say, there are some important decisions I have to make, or I have been told that I have to make. Getting married, finding a spouse, getting married, having a family, producing babies for my parents. If I can slow down those decisions until I know that I have built the right foundation underneath what would be the institution that I build my future on, should you choose to, something I disagree with, but in any case, should you choose to get married, build a foundation, the foundation of intelligence, wisdom, maturity, manhood, wealth, so that you have a support system, first of all, for yourself. Secondly, for whoever becomes dependent on you, or for whoever you choose to carry a burden for. If you can do that process of slowing down those decisions, yes, you will be criticized for not making those early decisions like people, but also what you would find is once you turn 30 and as you approach 35, suddenly, like Paul or Saul, the scales will fall off your eyes eventually, where you start to see things much more clearly. And one of the things you would find, and here's where I close today's session, the same women who 15 years ago you were crazy about getting married to, 10 years ago you were crazy about getting married to, at 35, when you see them, you would say, whoa, wasn't I lucky? Wasn't I a lucky bastard? Because in almost all instances that I found, I look at everyone who was in my age group, who I thought was, 9 over 10, I could sacrifice my future for. I look at them today and I say, whoa, wasn't that lucky?